For November's block, we're going to be making the pineapple block. The pineapple is really just a log cabin with some squares added to the corners. You're going to be receiving instructions for making it without a paper pattern, and you'll also receive the paper pattern. You could make 2 copies of that and use that as a paper piecing block. So it is your choice. You will first cut out your pieces. You're going to have light colored strips, and they don't really have to be light and dark, just as long as they are contrasting. You cut out 1 square, you could fussy cut that square, for the center. Then you have light strips, mine are not really light, but they contrast with the purple. And then you're going to cut out squares, and it gives you the variety of sizes. You're also then going to mark down the center of each square, because we're going to sew on that marked line. You're going to take your light pieces and just sew them like you would a log cabin. You can sew 1 piece, flip it, then sew the next piece, or you can do top and bottom side to side. It goes a little quicker if you do top and bottom side to side, so that's what I'm going to do. Now that you've sewn your pieces, just sew the strips to the other sides. I lower my stitch length at this time because you're not going to be back stitching. Some of this you will be cutting off when you put on your little squares for your pineapple. You've now sewn a strip around your center square, and you're going to now add your corner squares. This is the difference between the pineapple and the log cabin. Because these 2 pieces would overlap, we're going to do 2 at the opposite corners first, and then press them out, and then the other 2. Now the other squares you can do all at one time because they will not overlap. The part with the X, we're going to be cutting that off. So if you would stitch just maybe 1 thread to the X'd side so that you make sure you have plenty of space for your triangle to turn and move out. It will be very helpful if you do that rather than stitching directly on the white line. Okay, you've sewn 2 corner pieces on, and then you cut away at the 1/4 inch. We'll do the same to the other, press them out, and then add the other 2 corner pieces. You now have all 4 corners added on and turned. Now you'll add your strips to the top and bottom and sides again, just like you did before. You have the next round sewn on, and then we add the next size up corners. Because these corners do not overlap, you can sew all 4 on at one time. So lay them out and just sew all the way around. When you have your last strip sewn around the outside, I find it helpful to square it up at 8.5 inches at this time before adding your last corner squares. Maybe that's because I don't sew very accurately, but you could do that if you would like. Once you've added your corners, just check and make sure you have an 8.5 inch unfinished square. If it is a little bit short, you can always add a little border around it, or you can just adjust it when you're sewing everything together at the end, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Okay, I want to also show you how to do the paper piecing method, which is my preferred method of making the pineapple. We're going to be doing a paper piecing pineapple. If you've never done paper piecing, what you want to do is get your center square. We'll put a little dab of glue on it, and then you bring it up to the light so that you can see it from the back, and you put your center piece right over your square, and you can see it here in the light. You can see the center square showing through. Then we're going to place either pieces or strips, it doesn't matter. We place them right sides together, and we will sew from this side because you can see it very well. The most important thing you're going to do is to lower your stitch length. You have to have a short stitch length in order for the needle to cut through the paper enabling you to remove the paper when you're finished. If you forget this step, you're going to have a heck of a time taking the paper off when you're done. So we'll lower, start maybe 2 or 3 stitches before the line and end 2 or 3 stitches after. Okay, you've done your stitching. Notice these are not together. We'll figure that out later. Let's cut this strip off now. Flip it, see where your line is, and then give yourself 1/4 of an inch at least. So that will cover this piece without any problem. Now, to make a 1/4 inch seam, you fold back your paper. You have your paper folded back. If you have an add 1/4 ruler, you could use your add 1/4 ruler here, cut off the excess to give yourself a 1/4 inch seam. I often do not do that. I just fold back the paper and cut it off at approximately a 1/4 inch seam. And I think that is fine. So you don't need to worry about that. Then, what you can do at this point is press. I always press flat first, then press open. So you have that piece in place, and you're ready to go for the other 3 pieces around the little square. Okay? Okay, now you have all of your pieces for the first round. They look a little funny because we're going to be trimming them off with the 1/4 inch add 1/4 ruler. So at this point, those are my light pieces. Now I'm going to add a row of dark pieces in the same manner. I'm going to add the dark piece. I will sew it from this side, trim the seam, press it out, and then just go around the next round with all of the pieces. Once you have your fabrics right sides together and you've put them underneath the machine to sew on top of the paper, I like to just flip this back to make sure you're lined up. You want to check your line here, and then just make sure you have enough fabric to cover that once you sew and flip. If you do strips, you need to do strips that are a little bit wider than, let's say, 1.5 inches. You want to do maybe 1.5, 1 3/4 inches of strips. On the regular sewing, without the paper piecing, you cut 1 1/4 inch strips, but that is really too small since sometimes you make the seam a little bit bigger underneath. You can't always tell. So you need to have your strip a little bit larger than that. So you've sewn on all of your dark pieces now. Remember, fold back the paper. If you have an add 1/4 ruler, put it on here now. Cut off your excess. If you do not have an add 1/4 ruler, just fold back your paper and cut off approximately 1/4 inch for your seam allowance. Then we are going to press flat first and then press open. Alright, so you've got now 2 rounds of your paper piecing. You do light going out and then dark at the corners. And we will just continue going around and around. The only piece that is different are these pieces on the outside edge. They have to be much larger. They're not the small strips like that, so they will have to be larger, so you cut those last. So I'm just going to continue piecing in the same manner, and then we'll show you the last corner pieces. I have a couple of small pieces left, and if you want to see if they fit, you try it out on this side. Now this one doesn't quite have enough space. And then this one will fit. Now I have to make sure I get it at the right angle, otherwise I'm going to have it short on the one side. That's another trick. If you get a little lost where you're supposed to sew, you can use a highlighter to draw the line where you're supposed to go next, if that helps. Okay, we have the next round of lights, and now I'm going to put on the next round of darks, and we're almost to the end. Once you're done with the last light strip, you need to do your corners. Now your corners are bigger, so you can either cut individual pieces, or you could just cut, say, a 3.5 approximately inch strip and use that. That way that will give you plenty of room. There's a bit more waste that way, but it does make it easier. On your last line, you want to stitch all the way out to the seam allowance, because this is going to be the finished part here. You want to also give it maybe a little bit of a back stitch. And stitch all the way off. Remember to cut off your seam allowance to the 1/4 inch. On your last strip, you want to make sure it goes over the seam allowance. You have to have that seam allowance there to make it a 8.5 inch unfinished square. Then we're just going to cut it a little bit outside of that. We want to trim it down later. We'll just cut it a little bit outside of that. And then we're ready to do the other corner. You can use this angle in your other corner so that you don't waste too much fabric. So we'll try to incorporate that by putting it this way, and then when we flip it, we have used that angle and we're not wasting too much. Okay, now we have all of the pieces sewn onto the corner. Everything is done. All we need to do is cut it out at the 8.5 inch finished size. If you have one of these square rulers, it's very helpful. This one has a 1/2 inch piece on it. Now, of course, this paper is 8.5 by 11, so we can easily do the 8.5 here, so that is not a problem. So we'll cut that at 8.5, and then the hard part comes in taking off the paper. Okay, you've cut out your square at 8.5 inches unfinished, and now to take off the paper, my stitches were very small. The needle cut through the paper, so it's easy to take off. However, you also want to hold onto your threads while you're doing that, or it will pull your thread out. Something that helps is a tweezer, because when you get down to these pieces, you will often have something left in the corners, and then you can go in with your tweezers and just pull that piece out. So this is the hardest part to me, is taking out all the paper. But when you're done, you have a nice finished block, and it's quite precise because paper piecing gives it that precise edge. All right, you're done.